It's 7 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting, Board of Selectmen, December 8th, 2015, to order. First order of business is actually review and approval of minutes, which there are none. So item 3 on the agenda is confirmation of future meeting dates. We have right now December 15th, January 5th, and January 19th of 2016. And also we have a December 22nd executive session at this point. So those dates?
Those work for me.
Okay.
Yeah, those January dates should work. You know, we've talked in the past about going to a weekly meeting, and I still think we should do that, especially as we come into
Yeah, into the budget
busy
season, yeah.
winter season.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, especially during January, I can certainly do weekly.
I think that's probably a good idea, especially, you know, since we are going to be busy and we space out some of these items, so.
Yeah, okay.
Well, we're going to have to get the town administrator search process started, so
Correct.
I think for that month we should consider it.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Okay, item 4 on the agenda is approval of payroll and vendor warrants.
I'll make a motion to approve the current payroll and vendor warrants.
Second.
Motion been made, second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, item 5 is citizen speak. Are there any citizens who would like to address the board? Seeing none, we'll move on.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. We can't speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any citizens who would like to, citizen speak?
Okay, sorry.
Okay. And if you could just state your name, and do we have a sign-in sheet, or? Okay.
Hi, good
Hi.
evening. My name is Amy Delaney. I live at 150 Pleasant Street, and I am coming to speak with you just as a resident of the town of Milton regarding the contract with Chief Wells. My husband and I have lived in Milton 17 years, and we've both been very active members of the community. We're town meeting members for about 15 years, and past Collicott PTO president. Also, just, you know, very involved with the parishes in Milton, and we love Milton. We love living in Milton. Fortunately, our family has been very healthy. We have, I actually personally do not know Chief Wells, but the interaction that we've had with the police have always been very positive since we've lived in Milton. I'm a nurse practitioner at Children's Hospital, so I understand the responsibility of dealing with people's wellness, and I actually can't imagine being a leader of a police department that has been so actively busy, especially in this day and age. I can speak to the fact that, you know, our kids have been through lockdowns at school. We live on Pleasant Street, which is a main street, so my husband has been first responder twice to some pretty significant car accidents. And ourselves, you know, that's our interaction with the police. And just sitting at town meeting and also hearing from police in general, our experience with the police has been very positive. I've heard many times, I've sort of been watching from afar just because we like to keep abreast of what's going on in Milton. And we've heard many times, you know, it's working. We've heard people come up and speak to you to say, it works, why are we doing anything about it? We should keep things the same. But I would argue that it's not just working, it's exceptional. And seeing Chief Wells' leadership and having such positive experience with feeling safe with raising our family here, I would urge you to come to some type of negotiation with Chief Wells. Our youngest, we have a 16, 14, and 11-year-old, and our youngest always says, and he actually came up with it on his own, you can't say you've lived until you've lived in Milton. And I would argue that he is right.
Nice sentiment.
I would argue that's wise coming from an 11-year-old boy, because we really have been so involved with campaigns, override campaigns, local politics. So that's the interaction that we've had with the chief, and I would agree that I think Milton is just an exceptional place to live. And we would love to see Milton be exceptional, and I think lots of why Milton is exceptional is due to the safety and the way that families feel and citizens feel. Our mother lives with us in an in-law apartment, and she said the same thing. So I would just, you know, I come to you just asking you, not personally knowing Chief Wells, but just following this issue from afar, to ask you to just consider coming to some type of compromise to keep him and keep our town under great leadership, so that people continue to say you can't say you've lived in Milton. You know, you can't say you've lived until you've lived in Milton. Thank you so much, yeah. And thank you all for your volunteer efforts and your time, too,
Thank you.
in
Thank you.
leading the town.
Anybody else?
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Gary Kelly. I live at 370 Hillside Street.
Mary, how are you?
David, how are you? Nice to see you all. And I also want to thank you all. It's very impressive the amount of volunteer time and commitment that you all make. We're very fortunate to have you all. I've been very impressed with the number of people that have come up and spoken on behalf of Chief Wells, and I felt compelled because I think the forum, which is a great opportunity as a citizens of Milton, certainly seems to be sometimes the obvious. Everyone's going to come up and speak, certainly, of the positive nature and the good results of expectations of the chief. And that's the same here, but being a lifelong resident, I was trying to go through the history. There's maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different police chiefs. And so since my driving days, 35 years ago, my first run-in with Chief Wells was when he was Officer Wells. So I really didn't care for him because he pulled me over with all my friends and gave us a ticket. So there was a number of years that I was not very fond of at the time. He was just obviously a patrolman. But since then, a lot has changed, and obviously we live in a different world, as we all know. And over the last 20 years or 30 years of myself, I've become much more actively involved in the community as well. Past president of Milton Girls Softball, Milton Boosters, the MFE, a number of different community events in the town over a number of years. So it always feels good to give back also. And I've had a number of different dealings with Chief, all professionally. I really didn't know him personally that well up until these last 10 or 15 years. So it's a great opportunity for not knowing how this has come about as a citizen, knowingly that there's a contractual, a contract situation. We all know contracts can be renegotiated, and I think that's why the citizens are coming forward, hoping you guys, as collectively, will have the opportunity to maybe do the right thing to possibly keep someone who seems to be extremely qualified and someone who's extremely professional at his job. So that's where I needed to come forward, because I had a conundrum saying, what's the issue? He's extremely competent. I don't think there's a job performance issue. There's never been any lack of voter confidence as in prior maybe administrations. And the way I look at things, having 3 daughters and going through the school system, and now just my youngest has graduated, being different times, we have gone through, as we all know, some very challenging times within the Milton community. And a number of things could have gone wrong, and they all actually went very well. And I think that's a tribute to the whole force, obviously, the way it's managed, the way it's communicated, the effectiveness, the accessibility, all the things that takes great leadership. So, going through multiple lockdowns and, some very difficult, shootings years ago of Belvedere, whatever the street was, there was a number of situations that could have been, I think, highlighted or possibly reviewed that if you didn't have the correct experience could have gone maybe not the result that we all wanted. So as a parent, I'm very fortunate, first and foremost, because my schools are safer, the town feels safer. Actually, I did a little research, and we are, barely on the radar. Our crime rate is down. It's one of the lowest in the nation. But to me, it's more important to how the management and the leader from the top deals with the officers, because it's difficult to lead, as you know, and all the police officers, no one's ever always going to like you being from the top. But I've seen a big change over the last 10 years or so, and I don't know how long Richard's actually been the chief, but I have seen a very positive change the way the officers are communicating with the community. They're up in my neighborhood for a situation, good or bad, my car broken into. The gentleman's telling me how he wants to make sure that he wants to get to know everyone in the neighborhood. That was refreshing, instead of just taking information and moving on. So I've noticed a very positive change in reference to the patrol and the sergeants and the workforce. And to me, that speaks loudly, obviously, from Richard's work. From a professional standpoint, being in the community, whether it was the boosters or the MFE or the girls softball, we had multiple dealings that it was always either a phone call away. It was always executed very well. It was always very accessible. The communication was always excellent. So here I am saying, it seems like everyone gets a chance to come up here and say all glowing things, but I felt, again, compelled to let you know that if it's, how do we, to resolve the issue, I'm confident as a citizen, we're fortunate to have you people in place to hopefully go back to the table and take care of what needs to be done. If the gentleman still wants to work, obviously, for the town of Milton, and he's still competent, we all know from the job that we've seen and experienced how well he's done. So once again, I appreciate it. I hope you come to an agreement. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to address the board? No one? Okay, move on. Okay, item 6 on the agenda is a public hearing on the Eversource pole relocation on Brush Hill Road. Do we have that? Oh, we do. Hello.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hello.
So this is a pole relocation. Is it 2 poles or just 1?
It's actually an installation of one new pole.
New pole, okay, right. On Brush Hill Road near Dana Ave. Is this for the new housing development?
Residential development going in.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody have any
Normally,
questions?
we have something from the town engineer. I didn't see any.
I didn't, no, I had the same
Do
question.
we need a memo, or do we have
It
one?
is in there. I didn't get it until today.
Okay, but he's reviewed it and,
Yeah, he sent it to Barbara last month.
yeah, okay.
Actually, I was just looking for it, and I don't see it here, but we,
It's linked
notice
before
it.
the,
oh, it's before?
yeah, it's the page before.
Okay.
Oh, I see it, all right.
All right, as long as we have that, I don't have any other questions.
And I'll make a motion to approve a request from Eversource DBA N-Star for a pole relocation on Brush Hill Road westerly approximately 358 feet southwest of Dana Ave, then turning and running northwesterly at a distance of 41 feet conduit at P2772 and northerly approximately 378 feet southwest of Dana Avenue, then turning and running northwesterly a distance of 41 feet conduit at P2772A.
Second.
Okay, and this is a public hearing, so if anybody in the audience wants to address anything on this issue, they certainly can. Okay, seeing none, the motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And happy holidays.
Same to
You too.
Thank you.
Okay, next, item 7 on the agenda is a meeting with Ned Cochran on the special town meeting article entitled Ice House Zoning.
Good evening.
Hey, Ned.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate it. Ned Corcoran. I am here in my capacity as an attorney for the McKean family, and I'm joined by Patrick and Joseph McKean, 2 of the McKean brothers who grew up at the property at 487 Blue Hills Parkway. I have a brief slide presentation to show you, give you an overview of the property, proposed uses. We have collected to date close to 200 signatures in support of a citizen's petition for town meeting in April. We're calling it the Parkway Planned Use Development zoning. It is going to be very specific to this location.
Okay.
There's been some debate among some in town as to whether we should have a more general approach to non-conforming business uses and providing a special permit process to allow redevelopment, reinvestment in those types of properties. But given that February 8th is a close date and probably certainly not enough time to study the unintended consequences of a more general approach,
Right.
particularly consequences if different neighborhoods all of a sudden were aware that there was a property nearby that maybe could be redeveloped for such and such a purpose. We thought it important to pull back. Conversations with Emily Ennis as the chair of the Planning Board and others, understanding that in this case, probably the right way to go for the time being is a specific bylaw. And we will address, I think the Planning Board intends to address a broader bylaw approach in the coming year,
Okay.
probably for October town meeting. And I'm
think it's a great
certainly
idea.
advocate for that. So let me give you a quick overview. This is an aerial photo, probably the 10,000-foot level, looking down on the yellow rectangle in the middle of the property, and I call this the hole in the donut. If you look at the density of residential development that has grown up over time in the town that surrounds that property, you can see the yellow, that is the site in question on the westerly side of Blue Hills Parkway. It abuts the Pope's Pond Conservation Area, and it is across the street from the bottom of Guile Road, which serves the high school. Next, the next two are sort of move closer in. This is a closer in view, and there's another one with it. The property sits on the westerly side of the parkway. There are 15 single-family dwellings that run from Canton Avenue at the southerly end of the parkway north, about halfway up the parkway. That at one time was all part of property owned by Frank Pope, who had an ice business starting in the 1870s. He owned some 40 acres and included that property in the 50s and 60s. Those lots were subdivided off and sold as residential house lots, Residence B zoning, 20,000 square feet of property. They are the only sort of residential abutters to the property. And there's Home Inc. Across the street. So, quick history of the site. It was owned and purchased in 1854 by a gentleman named John Myers, who had a cabinet making business at the property. Sometime in the 1870s, James Francis Pope, Frank Pope, started his ice business and ultimately bought the property in 1881. Interestingly, Mr. Pope was born and raised in Dorchester, fought in the Civil War with the Union, was captured at the Battle of Gettysburg, spent the balance of the war in a southern prison camp, returned to this area and entered the ice business with Turner. And the two of them together had an ice business in the two ponds, Turner's Pond and Pope's Pond, a name for them. They ultimately formed the Blue Hill Ice Company, and after Pope's death, it was sold to the company in 1920, later sold in 1924 to the Metropolitan Ice Company of Boston, and later to the Elliott Creamery, Henry's building fame, in 1948. So ice was the business of that property for probably 70 years.
Yeah.
Interesting, as an aside, I've done a little bit of work recently for Brian Walsh. His family owns property in Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, and they own the old bunkhouse for the ice business up there. There was an ice house that was 3 acres in size. It had its own railroad siding that fed directly to the Boston and Maine Railroad and brought ice down to the city and then distributed probably around the world. In 1955, it was purchased by Albert Rugo, who was a fairly well-known architect, did a lot of work in the Fenway Park area of Boston, and he was there for quite a while, and then the McKean family bought it and operated the McKean Oil business starting in 1983. The 5 McKean brothers grew up there, and they operated their oil business from there. So there's been a history of sort of non-conforming business uses. Can't say it's strictly pre-existing non-conforming because there were non-conforming business that changed after 1938 when zoning was enacted, enacted, and there were no permits that were granted sort of to allow those modifications. So it's continued on as a business use. Strictly speaking, they were non-conforming, but technically speaking, under zoning lingo, not pre-existing enactment of zoning. This is a survey of the Pope's Pond area from 1905. You can see the shape of the pond in the middle of the picture, much different than what you saw in the earlier aerials. And then the next one is a survey. It's difficult a little bit to pick up in this, but of the pond. The pond is sort of the, and I don't have a pointer, but on the left-hand half of the property, big sort of diamond-shaped, elongated diamond-shaped part of the survey area is Pope's Pond. And in fact, what we think happened was that they dammed up the entry to Pine Tree Brook to the northeasterly side, and it allowed the large field area to be flooded, so that it was a very shallow pond, which would freeze quickly. Didn't need it to be really cold to freeze, and it would freeze and sufficiently to pull ice out constantly through the winter. The next slide just is taken from some photographs taken from the Boston Globe in 1956. No longer, these photographs are taken from an ice business that was still existent in Easton, but it shows you sort of how they got at the ice. They had large wooden rafts, and they pulled out along in the pond, and they would cut up large pieces of ice, pull them back up on the rafts, and then pull them in and store them in these very large buildings. What I neglected to show, and if you can go back one, Anne Marie, the property, just show it quickly. The property is here, and then there's two large buildings that you can see. Each of those is about an acre in size. Those were 4-story ice houses. Received and stored ice, and then would be shipped into Boston, down to the wharf, on ships out and around the world. Next. So here's the property as it exists, looking at it from the parkway. There's a large sort of 3-family dwelling that is perpendicular to the parkway. That was worker quarters historically. There is a beam in that building that goes back to the time that it was built, and it supposedly says delivered to Frank Pope 18-something, and that beam we think would be part of a new set of buildings. Will take advantage of some of the old physical characteristics. Probably have to tear down those buildings and replace them, but that we can use some of the materials as part of a historic rendering restoration approach.
That'd be great.
To the rear is a large barn that's just parallel to the parkway. That was the barn where the horses and the carriages and wagons were kept, and to the left end is an old office that was attached. There's another outbuilding in the back. The next picture, I think gives you different views of the buildings, but what's neat is the look in the lower left of the two photographs that show sort of the inner workings of the barn where the horses. You can see when you go in and tour it, you can see how some of the wood structures were damaged from the horses and gnawing at them and chipping at them and things like that. These are sort of current conditions, essentially current conditions. This is a couple of years old, taken from the town's GIS website. You can see the Blue Hills Parkway on the right-hand side. You see the 3-family that is perpendicular in the lower right-hand corner. You can see the size of the barn that's sort of in the middle of the property. There's a small building to the bottom portion of the property, and then there's an old swimming pool that was installed by the McKeans. That pool is no longer there. That's been filled in. But the rest of the site is basically as you see it. The plan is to replace those old structures essentially in the same place with new ones, and to park it. There's we're looking at about 16,000 square feet of building area, gross floor area. The large barn would be replaced with a market structure, which would be 8,000 square feet of first floor retail space, another 4,000 square feet of office space on the second floor. The other building that would replace the structure of the three-family would be a small bank building, 2,000 square feet, over 2,000 square feet.
So that'd be the
Total.
front and the larger building would be to the rear of the
To the
property.
rear. And part of it is to preserve some of the, two things. One is the interesting and mature open space and trees that are in the front of the property. There's some beautiful old trees to the front and a large green area, and we think we can preserve that. Parking can be set further back, the buildings can be set back, basically replacing building mass for building mass. Different scales to a degree, but essentially building mass for building mass. And then in the rear, cleaning up the rear of the property as it connects to the Pope's Pond Conservation Area, and putting in some sort of a walking trail that would connect over from the footbridge right into the rear of the property. Right now, there is no way you can go further north on the parkway. There's a walking path that comes in from the parkway, crosses that footbridge and goes into the neighborhood on the other side. This would provide a direct walking connection between that neighborhood and the new market facilities. And the plan really is to invite a small market, fruit center in scale, about 6,000 square feet of market area. Thinking something, we did offer it to Fruit Center, and if they're at all interested, we are interested in talking to them, but they declined initially. But something like a small Roach Brothers concept store, a Harvest food market, foodies market, something like that. It's a smaller in scale, sort of higher end, fresh produce, not the large supermarket that you would think. So it's really a
So you get an
neighborhood.
idea what 6,000 square feet is. How big is the fruit center in East Milton, do you know?
The total of that,
Just the market part itself?
probably a similar square
Six,
footage.
7,000
You know,
square
maybe 6,000 to 8,000 square feet.
Mhm.
And then the balance of the first floor, depending on how the leasing went out, we think would be great for a cafe, nice cafe restaurant, perhaps with a liquor license. And there would be with seating to the back, out the rear, so that in good weather, 6 months of the year, you can activate that connection to the footpath and to the conservation area. And then the front building, I'm thinking something like a standalone bank building with offices on the second floor. Meeting House Bank, Blue Hill Bank, those types of banks like to put their flag in the ground. They want to be have real estate presence. It's how they market themselves. It's how they advertise themselves to their customers. So a small bank presence with a drive-through, and then offices upstairs in each of the two buildings. Calls 16,000 square feet of building area, of gross floor area, calls for about 65 parking spaces. I think that we can comfortably accommodate both. The bylaw that's proposed would say that we need 30% of private site will be open space. It has to be meaningful open space and meaningful and available to use by the public. We think we can accommodate that easily, and we'll look forward at the right time to engaging with a really good landscape architect to really sort of think about how to activate that. The setback, the only setback requirement that we're maintaining is really from the residential property that's next door just to the south. It's the only direct abutter other than the town or the state. And the town owns the conservation land around on the west and the north, and the state owns the parkway. Next. So this is a concept look of the new, those two new buildings set on the property. You can see how we preserve the large trees and the green space in front. There are two driveways. The main driveway would be the northerly driveway, the one away from the next door neighbor. So there'd be an in and an out at that location. There would be an out, a right out only on the other side of the bank building, particularly for the drive-through teller machine and a right out. So,
Is there an island cut?
is it what?
Is there an island cut?
There is not an island cut, and at this point, we're not proposing an island cut.
Okay, so you will have to take a right-hand turn coming out of the place.
And that's something we would get into more specifically with the Traffic Commission and with DCR, based on ultimately what they collectively think is the best way to address the management of traffic. And I'll get into in a minute the specific issues of traffic, but one of the things that we would need to do, there are no crosswalks on the Parkway, and probably from both access from the high school and access from Home Inc., it would make sense to create some safe crossings. So there may be a crossing light that you would think about putting in as opposed to a full traffic signal with lefts and rights, but that's something we'd have to carefully design. So I think, as I said, the proposed development, 8,400 square feet of market and cafe, 4,000 square feet upstairs, and then 2,000 over 2,000 in the bank building, 65 parking spaces. So side-by-side comparison, you can see how the buildings sort of relate, the new buildings relate to the old, and then a side-by-side next with the rendering of before and after. Next, and then obviously we talk about reactivating the waterfront and engaging that waterfront in a meaningful way. Next, and there's a couple of slides I think that move through that show, there's the footbridge looking sort of at the rear of the property, and the next photo looks into the rear of the property from the area that's part of the conservation land. So traffic is always an issue in any type of development, and we've had a preliminary traffic analysis done by Vanessa and Associates, and good news is that despite the fact that there's a fairly significant volume of traffic on the road today, we add next to none in terms of new traffic volumes. Current traffic volumes are about 40,000 vehicle trips on an average annual daily basis. 20,000 going north, 20,000 coming south. And the way you define a trip is it's 1/2 of one round trip. We have the estimate based on the size of the development is that there would be about 770 new trips per day on a weekday basis that would be added to the site, 385 ins and 385 outs, spread out over the course of the day. The peak hour in the afternoon would have 94 trips into the site. Saturday volumes are a little lower, 302 over in 604 trips over the course of the day, and 94 trips at the peak hour, sort of in midday. The other thing is that, according to the traffic analysis, it's really well distributed among the different spokes. So if you go back one, there are really sort of 4 general areas that the traffic comes from. Half comes from the north on the Parkway, but of that, portions come from the northwest, sort of the Blue Hill Terrace Street, Tucker School side of, and there are several alternatives. Blue Hill Terrace, he's allocated sort of the trips on the peak hour basis to Blue Hill Terrace for the sake of the preliminary exercise. There would be 10 vehicles coming Blue Hill Terrace Street during the peak hour. That's 1 every 6 minutes. Coming on the northeasterly side, we use Warren Avenue as the main, although there are Houston and other parallel streets. In that case, 15 vehicles from the peak hour, which is 1 every 4 minutes. Sumner Street on the southwest would capture some traffic between Blue Hill Avenue and Canton Avenue before we turn north onto the Parkway. There are other opportunities for traffic to get to between Blue Hill Avenue and Blue Hill Parkway before it gets to Sumner. But The traffic there is expected at 5 vehicles per peak hour, so that's about one every 12 minutes. And then Canton Avenue itself, coming in either direction from the northeast by the top of the high school, Guile Road, the Indian Cliffs area, Gulliver Road area, and then coming from the southwest. The combination of those, of each of those directions would be 45 trips in the peak hour. So, you know, less than one per minute, but spread from the north and the south.
Yeah, looking at this, I would think, I mean, just knowing that area, having lived up on Blue Hill Ave for 35 years now, Sumner Street isn't used very much. For the most part, it'd be Robbins. I would guess those vehicle trips would
Right.
probably come down Robbins from any place from the fire station.
Yeah, and some of the trips, I think, if you go back to Anne Marie, just to the, you know, some of those trips coming down Summer would be coming from that dense neighborhood to the west
That live in there.
that live in that
Yeah.
neighborhood. Those who don't walk, if it's not a nice day, you're gonna either come Summer, you're gonna go south and in, or you're gonna go Blue Hills
Yes,
Terrace
yeah.
Street. So you're gonna make that, you have that choice. I think he ascribes more of that traffic to Blue Hill Terrace Street than he does to Sumner.
Yeah.
So we've had two neighbor meetings. We met with direct neighbors 5 or 6 weeks ago, meeting at the library. We had solid support from direct neighbors. We met with a much larger group, and we invited all of the town meeting members from the 3 precincts that surround the donut. And we had fewer than I thought might be there. I think we had 30 plus or minus. And when the next door neighbor said, thumbs up, I'm with him, I'm in support of this, all of the tension left the room, and there was a lot of excitement for it. I've been invited to meet tomorrow at Home Inc. and have coffee with the residents. They are very excited about what they've heard. In fact, Joe and Ann Murphy have been to both of the meetings. Joe Murphy has. We invited them because they are approximate abutter. And, you know, we've heard a lot of positive things, so we'll open it up to comments or questions. Obviously, anything we can do to refine what we're doing based on what we hear is important. But we're excited. It's a great opportunity.
I think it's a great plan. I mean, I like the concept. I like the thought of having walkable retail space in a residential area. I think it's great for the neighborhoods, and I think that should work well. I'm glad to see that the traffic was kept behind, that we don't have traffic on the parking at the street level, and keeping the green space was really nice. So, the only question I do have is why the decision for office space above as opposed to residential?
We thought pretty carefully about that. There's enough density of commercial that we think it really conflicts with residential upstairs. This is unlike sort of the 36 Central and maybe what gets done at the Hendry's building, which is some retail downstairs, but fairly dense residential
Yeah,
upstairs.
this would be just the opposite.
This is really the opposite. This is more of a business commercial setting, and we just think that there's an inherent conflict that just doesn't get managed very well. We thought about it. In fact, earlier drafts of the bylaw that we were working on provided the alternative for residential, but I think the feeling because it's site-specific, and because the McKean family really sees it as sort of a commercial use, that's what they've targeted. They think it works. It's the best combination of uses together, easier to manage, sort of conflict of activities. You know, you can imagine residents upstairs having issues with deliveries on weekends or people coming in and out and accessing the access to the conservation land behind and other things. It's just one of those things we just thought, keep it simple and move it forward in this direction. I think a more general bylaw approach, if we're thinking about non-conforming business uses, then you would certainly want to think about residential. The sites are smaller. The opportunities for development in many cases are much smaller and tighter, and residential can moderate, in those cases, I think, some of the activities that would happen downstairs. I just think that in this case, we thought that it wasn't the right time.
I think it's a very well laid out project, Ned. I think you guys took your time and certainly, during my campaign, I spoke to a lot of neighborhoods and especially over that side of town, there was a clamoring for something like this. And generally what you'd hear was, yes, we want something, but not next to me. Well, it seems that we hit a home run here, especially with the direct abutter saying thumbs up. And I know I can speak for my parents at Home Inc., saying that this is a good project and it's very convenient for some of the older folks, I think, travel-wise. And I think the walkability for the project and the open space speak volumes, and it preserves some of the character of the town, so.
When the McKeans came to me about a year ago to talk about, their first instinct was residential, similar to the St. Pius property on a smaller scale. And we actually started thinking about that and site planning that. And I was at a large lot condominium meeting, and I raised the question about residential here, and there were a couple of people at that meeting who came to me afterwards and said, don't put residential there. We need a market. This area needs a market. I said, will you support it? They said, yes, we will. They said, remember, the market wasn't the reason why the zoning failed at the Temple site. And people will support the market. They really want it. And sure enough, they have. So we went with that. We took a little risk, spent a lot of time and effort looking at it on the market side and the commercial side, and we think it's worked.
I'll just echo what's already been said. I like the design as well, and the incorporation of the river and opening that up to some outdoor seating and some other amenities in that area. So I like what I've seen and heard of this, and would be interested in reading the article if you have it, that you could send it to us, Ned.
I will.
Whenever it's ready.
I think I've just finalized it. We have a whole lot of signatures in support of it based on sort of the last combination of drafts, but and it's going to be filed this week, and I will email it to Anne Marie so that she can send it along.
Now, assuming it gets a thumbs up all around from town meeting and everything, when would you anticipate completion of the project?
Sort of run ahead from February. You've got 3 months for the Attorney General to review it,
Yep.
and we know that they take the full 90 days. And during that period of time, the McKeans will be actively working on developing a tenant roster and perhaps a development partner, someone who can sort of come in and do the development work. And then if that happens, we'd be hoping to file the application for special permit by the summer, be through the planning board's process by the end of the summer, and then breaking ground in the fall. And so
Fall of
figure
16.
fall of 16, figure 12 to 18 months in terms of development and construction. The fall of 16, spring of 18, 2 years, a little over 2 years from now.
Sounds good.
Is it just the planning board, or would you need to go to the Conservation Commission?
Do need
Board of
Conservation
Appeals or anything?
Commission.
No.
Don't need Board of Appeals. Had given some thought to pursuing a variance route as opposed to town meeting. May have done that, but for the fact that planning board, but the fact there was a town meeting coming in February and there was an opportunity to get on it. And I think it's, I know that the Board of Appeals has the power to grant use variances, but they are generally loath to do it. It takes takes a lot to get there, that level of support. So we think, in this case, given the nature of the use, given the volume, the intensity of the use, it's not just converting, one building into a small office building. We're adding a lot. We just thought that the right place to go was town meeting.
Yeah.
And getting town meeting blessing on this would be significant.
And
I agree.
the improvements to the open space and Pope's Pond are going to be subtle improvements, but kind of making it accessible and that kind of thing.
A little bit sort of like the walking path to Turner's Pond.
Mhm.
We can add that, at least that access down to connect to the path that's at the bridge, and perhaps participate in creating a path that will run all along the easterly edge of the pond. Because right now, I don't think that that's fully accessible publicly today. A couple of fishermen tell me that, they'd rather see it stay quiet in the way it is, but I think
Probably underutilized. And once a project like this goes in, there'll be a lot more use of it, so that's good.
That's great. Okay.
all right, thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
And we will carry on and look forward to town meeting.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Item 8 on the agenda is a conference update of Logan, update from our Logan CIC representative, Cindy Christensen. Hi, Cindy.
Hi.
Cindy, how are you?
I think like the rest of the town, I'm a little tired from these planes the last day or so.
Pretty bad recently.
Yeah. So there was the Logan CAC meeting November 12th, and I'll give you a brief update about that. I attended in person, and Andy Schmidt from the ANAC also attended as a guest. Regarding the Blands 3, which is the noise study, Boston Logan Airport noise study, there was no mention of the Board of Selectmen letter, but it was clear that the people had received it. There continues to be comments made about who made these runway configuration choices for Test 1 and Test 2, and no one seems to really want to own that decision, so that's something that's ongoing. There continue to be problems with Test 1 and Test 2, some of which were discussed at the meeting. Some of the communities deny that there's any problems, and it's the communities that seem to be benefiting from these tests. The Logan CAC, apparently we need $30,000 from somebody to come up with all this information that we have not been able to get from Massport or from the FAA. So there was a lot of debate back and forth about where this money should come from.
And Massport isn't going to volunteer the information, they have to pay for it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. It's, so what, if you've heard the other day at the forum, $30,000, that's what they're talking about. So this information that we asked, that the CAC has been asking for, we also asked for in the letter that you sent, apparently is $30,000 worth of information that the FAA says they don't have the money for, and Massport says they don't have the money for. So, but, people, I forget what you call the group, but the executives of the Logan CAC, the president and the vice president, they're trying to twist some arms to actually get that money so that we can get basic information like where are the planes supposed to be flying, where are the planes flying, what percentage of planes are flying different runways. It's really basic information that I actually asked for it like the day after you guys appointed me CAC rep, because I thought I was going to be behind the curve as far as joining the CAC back in May, but the information has not been made available to any of the CAC members, so it's quite
I started asking in January for it.
Yeah.
Almost a year ago.
So it's been almost a year since.
Yeah,
These are
a
requests.
unanimous vote for this information, and we still don't have it, and yet the Blands 3 is moving forward, and that was partly, my urgency last time I came in was, it just seems like a disaster for the Logan CAC to be making recommendations when they don't even have the basic information they need. At the time, I didn't realize how how many planes actually fly over Hull, for example. I thought since it's kind of out there over the water, they can probably avoid Hull, but that's not the case at all. So I think a lot of the Logan CAC members are uninformed, but it's because we haven't been given the information we need. The CAC decided to do a test 3, and that will involve looking at overnight or nighttime noise. It was stated that the implementation of the 4L RNAVs will reduce the nighttime noise for the region. That was stated by another CAC member.
4L RNAV will reduce the nighttime noise?
Yeah, I don't know if you remember at the May FAA forum down at the Mass Transportation, that's the FAA's argument. One of their arguments too for implementing the 4L RNAVs is that right now they can't land on the 4L during certain weather conditions, probably like what's going on today. I don't know. I don't quite understand that. But if they make these into both the visual and the GPS RNAVs, then they can take some of that back, the problem that causes a backup on the 4Rs in bad weather conditions. So that's an important thing to note for Milton, is that that's one of the arguments that some people on the Logan CAC are making for this implementation of the 4Ls. The other things I wanted to mention that I'm working on because I think they're important is the problem created by demand at Logan Airport, and also the president of the Logan CAC's recommendation of a population-weighted average for decision-making once we finally get all this information. Both of those problems, the demand and the population-weighted averages, are not good for Milton, nor do I think that they're fair. I actually think that the population-weighted average is an unethical approach for distribution of noise. So we haven't gotten far enough for me to start raising my concerns about that, but I wanted to mention that these are two things that I'm trying to understand more about, and also to talk a little bit with other people behind the scenes about those two things. The other thing that's kind of related to noise is we can't seem to get information on who actually gets to control the time slots at Logan. So is that, it sounds like if you just listen to Massport that they have no control over it. It's in the airline industry's power to decide when they want to land, when they want to take off. And Jerry Falbo, who's a representative from Winthrop, is an attorney, so he's trying to get more information. I've also tried to reach out to a couple of people. They say that it all goes back to some rules and laws initiated back in the 70s, but it's really unclear because part of what's happening is they can land the most planes in the shortest amount of time to the force. And so when demand backs up, when there are a lot of planes trying to land at any given time, they're going to try to use the force. And it appears that that's a common reason for using the force. So it seems like one of the problems would be we'll disperse the arrivals throughout the day to different time slots. But apparently that's not as easy as it sounds, and we don't really know why at this point. But that's something to watch. It's pretty clear there was an announcement about the Lynch meeting that was made, and it's pretty clear that there's some misunderstandings about Milton in general and who we are and how burdened we are, because some of that keeps coming up in the announcements that are made about our town, and I'm working to try to move the needle a little bit as far as, it's not like Milton wants to move the planes to somebody else. We just want a fair distribution. So it's touchy, and I understand why. I mean, it's tough on lots of people. I wanted to mention briefly that the Massport CAC seems to be an agenda item for these Logan CAC meetings, and I think that that's because so many of the representatives on the Logan CAC are also Massport CACs. Mm-hmm. They said that this report was given again by Jerry Falbo from Winthrop. They currently have about 36 members on that. They are awaiting an appointment from Lynn, and they attempted, the organizing group that's also working on the bylaws attempted to have the quorum rule changed for that group, but it was voted down, and I'm not sure who was voting, but I was told that Massport was against that change. So they're sticking with they've got to work with the quorum, which is just, I mean, it's a complete barrier for this group, because they've got people from all over the place trying to come into Logan for a meeting. It's going to be tough. But I think that's, the politics are working behind the scenes to make it hard on these communities to actually have a voice. So it's very unfortunate. I wanted to move on to and just say briefly about the letter that the selectmen sent. I just wanted to remind us that we requested a meeting. I know there's been a whole lot going on since the time the letter went out and now, but we did request a meeting with, I think it was, who was it, with Tom Glenn and the FAA, and of course the FAA says, well, we're meeting with you, and I guess they did. We also talked about whether or not there should be letters or endorsements of this letter from other groups in town, so I think that's something that's still ongoing. There are other things I've done as a CAC rep since I last reported to you, but I'll just mention a couple of them. The Logan CAC now has a representative from Randolph. It's the health director, John McVeigh, so that's a big plus for us, I think. It's one more person who understands, because they don't get them as low as we get them, but they get the same planes that we get with the 4s. The other thing that has happened is that there is a response to the EDR, and in my response, I just wanted to make a note that last year when I wrote to whatever EDR that was back then, I mentioned the LAX study, and that Massport has the capabilities of studying particulates on their location, so they should also be studying them in communities like ours. They responded in this current EDR that they're going to start following that, but of course they haven't. But it's just something to note that they are claiming that they're going to follow it. They haven't yet. I wanted to report that we've made a couple of data requests. Andy asked about data. He wanted to know what time of day and day of the week noise complaints were made, because, I think this past year we've had this huge number in 2015 of complaints. So we actually were successful. I got Massport to send me that data. So Andy has it now and is looking at that to answer some of the questions he has. I think it goes back to demand, the heavy demand days. We're going to get more planes, and that's when the complaints are going to go up. I think you're aware that Senator Joyce asked for data in a letter. They actually received it, it was either the day before or the day of the FAA meeting, but Andy and I both looked at it and we both found problems with it. So I sent a note to Rebecca and asked that they send it back to Massport, and that Massport do the data checking, because when you find something so, at first glance, just so clearly wrong with the data, we don't want to spend a lot of time analyzing it. So that's where that is at this point. It's data that's very inviting to look at, because we've got altitude data in there at 2 points for each runway or flight path over Milton. So once we get it and once we can trust that it's reasonable, it will be informative to look at. The other piece of information that I've been trying to get for a while is runway restriction information. I've got conflicting information at this point, which seems to be the case in most of the information that we get. At one point, I received information from the Logan CAC president that indicated that the 4L arrival path had a restriction that nothing could land after 11. And when I investigated that further, I've learned that that's not the case. So there's something floating around that's incorrect, and just trying to get correct information.
We know they're arriving after 11.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the reason.
They take off bright and early.
Yeah, and then they take off bright and early, too, yeah. The reason I think we need to know this is because, we don't want them change, if there's something good, like I thought there was something good, like no arrivals to 4L after 11, we don't want to lose that for some reason that we're not aware of, but it sounds like we don't even have that. So we'll see if I can get that information or not. The FAA, actually, the last couple of days, has been quite responsive. I also wanted to make sure, I know I've mentioned it before, but this optimization of airspace and procedures in the Metroplex, OAPM, is another phase of the next-gen technology. And so I've asked when they expect this to happen in Boston, and the response I got was that we can expect it in 2017. So this is, with everything I've learned about this is, you always ask at least two people. It's like getting a second opinion because it's just, it's not purposeful. I don't think anyone is purposely giving incorrect information. It's just also complicated and depends on.
So what is OAPM?
OAPM is, the reason to pay attention to it is it's what's caused the lawsuit in Georgetown and Phoenix. It's a reconfiguration of the airspace at 3,000 feet and above. And the reason this concerns me for Milton is, most of what we're dealing with is below 3,000 feet, the arrivals. The departures are at 5,000 feet typically or higher when they come over Milton. But what could happen is the OAPM, the reason for OAPM, the design of the airspace is to connect the dots in the shortest possible distance possible. So my concern is Milton is so close to the airport that turns now that go down, like 9 departures that go down to North Scituate or Cohasset to make their turn. It could be decided, I don't know, but my concern is it could be decided that those going westbound need to take a quicker turn, and that would involve us.
And Cindy, they're supposed to be hitting correct waypoints, correct,
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing, is that we're not seeing the actual flight paths.
Right, no, yeah, and there's no, yeah, so they're not following the standards and what we do see, and that's another problem. That's why the CAC would like to see not only the flight paths with the waypoints that you're talking about, but we want to see the flight tracks, where did the planes actually go? Because the hint is from people on the ground, which hear it and see it.
They're not
They're
going where they
cutting
say they-
corners,
We heard a gentleman
yeah.
speak the other night from the south
Yeah.
end who said they go right over his house, so.
Even though he's
They may say that
outside.
they're going a different place,
Right.
but they're not actually doing it.
Yeah.
So we want proof of that.
Yeah, that's, the CAC's trying to get that. It's just, it's pulling teeth.
The altitude should be interesting, too, to see, because
The
it certainly
altitude.
seems like they're lower in the sky than they ever were.
Yeah,
And they keep saying that they're 2,500 to 3,000 feet, and they don't appear to be.
right. Well, apparently, some people at the forum, you know what I'm going to say, asked this question afterwards, and, why are they so low? And the answer was, well, the planes now are bigger than they used to be, so they just appear lower. And what's odd about that answer is if you ask about, why can't you update planes, throw out the old ones, bring in some new quieter ones, they say, well, planes are, last 20 or 30 years. So those two answers are not consistent with one another. But the reason that we heard is the planes are not really lower, they're just bigger.
Yeah, someone from the FAA told me that, too.
Yeah, was it
pretty
you too?
incredible.
Yeah, it's, some of this stuff sounds like it makes sense at first. And that's part of the misinformation, I think, that everyone's dealing with. So the other reason that the OAPM concerns me for future, and just I bring it up because I want it to remain on somebody's, back burner, is that the documents I've seen, the reason that we're not as involved with OAPM at this point is because they say Logan has enough, they've got 2 runways that can handle high demand, and that's our, two configurations, I should say. It's the 4s, with arrivals, and then the other one involves the opposite direction. So the ones that affect us, they can land 61 per hour, and the other one 59. So that's kind of why Boston has been put aside for now about this OAPM, but it will come back to haunt us at some point. Wanted to mention, I reached out to the FAA just yesterday about the 4L RNAV with the question, when do you think, what's happening, what's going on? I got a response from Todd Friedenberg, who was there the other night. It's short, so I'll just read what he said. We still have to complete responses to the comments received prior to June 30th. We've received over 800 comments. And we have to be able to respond, or we have to be able to respond to each of those comments before we can complete the initial environmental review and then move forward with either a CADX, an environmental assessment, or an environmental impact study. Now, I didn't realize any of those were even possible, but the CADX is where they just kind of do what they want to do, and the others involve a little bit more public input.
Well, I think our comment letter asked for some of the more.
Oh, good.
The environmental assessment be done. That was part of our June 30th letter.
Okay, good. Until that's determined, we cannot implement either of the approaches. Having said that, we're hopeful to have completed at least the initial review prior to the end of the year. So, something to look forward to. The last thing I wanted to mention, I actually just noticed this as a text that I got while I was sitting here. There's a NEPA response deadline tomorrow that involves the additions to Terminal E. In East Boston, their group, Air Inc., and it's East Boston Environmental Group, is suggesting comments. I know that it's too late to ask Milton for comments, but I will send in something myself. The reason that the Terminal E is important to Milton is that they're upgrading it to handle the larger super duper jets that are like, 500 or 600 passengers. And so there apparently is a movement to try to respond to this MEPA response with that.
It's news to us.
It was news to me, too. I mean, I knew they were going to do it. I didn't know we had a chance to respond until just now. So there's I can send in a letter about that. So that's my update about CIC.
Our next meeting is mid-January?
Yeah, so every 2 months, I think it's second Thursday. And we are, Milton's kind of setting the trend here to invite and have guests come with us. So it's not, they don't follow under open meeting laws, but we can have guests show up. So you're all invited. We want to try to get to Logan at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. And that's it.
Thank you, Cindy.
Okay.
Are you going to stay for the next
Yeah,
meeting?
you're
like
welcome to
to?
stay for
Okay.
the,
Okay.
so the next item on the agenda is the discussion of the December 3rd meeting with FAA and Massport, which obviously we all attended, and I thought overall went well. It was, it could have turned into a boisterous free-for-all, and a couple of times it came close, but it fortunately never got there. So in that respect, I think it was.
In part, I think that's because the airplane committee was meeting several times to work on questions so that it wouldn't become that, but they would have questions to ask that they put a lot of time into, which was a good thing.
They did, yeah.
So Andy and the group, I think, did a lot of work, and I know they consulted with Cindy on
Yeah, we
some of the
appreciate all the work
questions.
that you guys did, but I think it truly showed what a faceless organization the FAA is and how unaccountable both Massport and the FAA are. So it was pretty glaring, I think, to all of us to see that.
Well, and that a lot of people are really suffering. It's
I think
just-
the other thing that came out, too, was the finger pointing between FAA and
Sure.
Massport. So, nobody could figure out who's responsible for what, and
hence
I would
you're not
still like
getting the
to
accurate
figure
data.
out, because, it certainly makes a difference. FAA, Massport, we theoretically have a little more control over at the state level than, we would over FAA at the federal level. but who's responsible for what? And we still really don't exactly know, which is frustrating.
But we have to thank Congressman Lynch and Representative Templey for pulling that together. I think
Yes.
it was quite, it was really a great thing for not only our town, but for the other communities that
Yeah.
share this burden.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear the war stories from
Sure.
some of the other
Hull was very
communities.
well represented, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah. A lot of places, I mean, it was good, though, there was even some North Shore representatives.
Yeah.
A lot of people from the city who were impacted. I thought Congressman Lynch did a great job running the meeting,
Mhm. Yes.
coordinating the responses from the FAA, and Capuano also
Right.
had some very helpful comments.
Yep.
Sure did.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to try and follow up in a month or so with Congressman Lynch to see if any of those suggestions that he had for FAA.
Yeah, the action plan
Right.
that he's looking to put together. I think
Yeah.
that would be a good follow-up.
Just to see where it's at, if it's moving at all, or,
So we need to send a letter to Congressman Lynch,
I think so.
thanking him for
Yeah.
organizing the meeting and putting all the effort that he did into it. And in talking with Cindy and Andy and Matt recently, we thought maybe the thank you letter should also maybe incorporate just some bullet points as to what Milton's key issues are, what relief we're looking for, or what our asks are.
Yeah. Hmm?
So I think we can hopefully we can have that for the 15th, the meeting next Tuesday, so we could sign it that
Okay,
night.
that's fine.
Sounds great.
And I should mention, if residents continue to have unanswered questions, I'm putting together that list and sending it to the FAA. They're also encouraged to send it directly if they would like, but to also include Congressman Lynch when they send it, because his office is trying to keep track of these unanswered questions. So there's many, there just wasn't time for everybody to
Sure.
get their questions answered. So getting it on record that we've asked, I think, is important. And people can send it to me or send it directly to the FAA and Congressman Lynch if they want.
That's
Yeah,
great.
so that way we'll have the thank you note with the asks plus Cindy's
A
follow-up letter,
yeah.
a separate letter with all of the
Right.
follow-up items and
Yeah.
questions.
The FAA tends, before I was CAC rep and I wrote to them directly, they always tell me, oh, you have to get your questions answered through the CAC rep. So that's the system that Congressman Lynch's office told me that they probably should continue to try to use, but it shouldn't stop somebody from writing to them directly like I used to if you want, It just may get kicked back, but,
Yeah, I think that's a good way to do it.
yeah.
We also talked the other night just about some ideas that we might have for follow-up that the airplane committee can probably take on. We still want to appoint some new members to that committee. This, maybe since we're televised, that would be a good opportunity to ask. If anyone out there in town is watching and is, maybe either hasn't been involved or is involved through Facebook or through the grassroots group, or is concerned about the issue and wants to help, we're interested in putting some more people on the committee, especially someone who might have a background as a researcher or a scientist. We think there's a need for that on the committee. But we have 3 or 4 openings, so if anyone's interested, they just need to contact the selectman's office and fill out a volunteer form, which is pretty easy to fill out, and get it in, and we have a couple of applications we've already received, but if there's anyone else who's interested, that would be a good thing.
Sure. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Cindy.
Okay, Marion, you're up. Item 10 is the approval reconsideration of Novara liquor license. And why don't you bring us up to date? I know there was some changes that got the license kicked back from ABCC.
Yeah, the reason I'm back here tonight is for two purposes. One is that ABCC wanted a complete profile of the financing for the restaurant up to $1.2 million. So we provided them with the alternatives that the restaurant was looking at that time, which was in September, but no definite copy of a loan or that kind of thing.
Yep.
So in addition to that, though, as it happens, the restaurant has 2 new investors. And when you add an investor for a restaurant that has a liquor license, you are supposed to bring it back to the Board of Selectmen for their
Corey's and-
approval, and then it has to go to ABCC. So we have that new information as well. So the financial information is the reason we're back here tonight. The package now looks like this. The restaurant needs $1.2 million. That was its estimate for its startup budget. And it has $850,000 now of cash contributions from equity investors, which leaves $350,000 that they needed a loan for.
Gotcha.
And they actually have a loan for $600,000. It's a private loan, and they have provided the actual document for the loan, terms of the loan, and
Yep.
how it's going to be paid back, which is
And the
in
loan
the
is from one of
materials.
the investors.
It is. But not one of the investors who was putting cash in
Right.
before. So that information should be complete now, according to what ABCC requires that we provide. And what I did was to redraft the application, which you have, with the changes to the pages in the application that would be required because of the new information. And I've also provided additional supplementary information for the addenda, because every time you add a new investor, that investor, if he's investing more than $50,000, has to provide a personal information form, and he has to provide a Corey release form. So I have those from the two new investors, and then had to get new personal information forms from all the investors because the percentages changed in the equity shares. I don't even know for sure whether I have to resubmit the personal information forms, but I did it because we were doing this anyway. So that's why you have a number of forms in Addendum A for revised and additional personal information, and Addendum A, Corey releases for the new investors. Finally, there was one equity investor who needed to provide more information, and he has now provided a bank letter, which was suggested by our contact at ABCC. Basically, it's just a letter from his bank saying, we've done business with you for a number of years.
Right.
You have the type of balances in your accounts and do the type of transactions that would allow you to make the investment that you've promised to the restaurant. And then I have financial information for the person who's providing the promissory note, because this is a private loan. If it were from a bank, you wouldn't have to provide background information, but you do if it's a private loan. So that's why there's more financial information for another person. And then finally, the promissory note itself, which ABCC requires. So I'm very hopeful that this will constitute a complete package of material for ABCC, and that they'll be able to do a quick turnaround, but that's contingent on the selectmen being satisfied and getting their questions answered. So I'm here to do that.
Does anybody have any questions?
I had one earlier, but Barbara coordinated the answer, so I've got the answer on that, so
Okay.
I'm all set.
Yeah, I'm fine too.
Other than to ask you about the opening date, because I know your memo says maybe December 15th.
15th,
but
that obviously
by the time
can't
we're
happen,
getting this
yeah.
in,
It's gonna be
what's the
later.
turnaround time with the ABCC on a?
They
on
told me
supplemental
very
information?
quickly. They said if it's complete, a few days, very quick.
Oh, okay.
And they're aware that, time is now running
Yeah.
short. I had to change the date because it said December 1st in the original application. It's past December 1st now.
Now, they're going to have a
So,
soft opening first, or?
They haven't decided for sure what they're going to do. What I did do today, what I brought you today to just keep for your next meeting in case, was a request for an additional hour of opening time if they are open, or if they do open on New Year's Eve. They are trying to open by the end of December. Their renovations have been proceeding on schedule, but the liquor license is
Couldn't
the,
imagine a restaurant would want to open on New Year's Eve.
I don't know whether
That would seem
they're
to be a
going
recipe for disaster.
I have no idea. But the letter is here. I'm just submitting it to the board for next week. If it turns out that we may be asking you to consider it, if the liquor license approval seems to move along, you only have that one meeting. So I'm just putting it out there.
Okay.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. They do have as their goal really is to open by the end of December. December 15th is probably still too early, but I put it in there just in case. It's very unlikely that it would be that early. And I don't have too much else to add. They've been doing some publicity. They've had a lot of work to do, just all of the work involved in setting up a new restaurant and getting everything in place, but everything does seem to be proceeding pretty well.
Good. So we do have a motion in front of us.
Yeah, okay. I'll make a motion to approve the application for a liquor license for 556 Adam Street, LLC, DBA Navara, to be resubmitted to the ABCC for reconsideration.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all is in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you
Mary.
very much.
Thanks, Mary.
Marion.
Okay, item 11 on the agenda is approval of the DPW FY 2017 budget, which we've seen once before and has been revised. So, Anne Marie, or Joe, why don't we
Hi, Joe.
take us through the
Sure.
revisions here?
Simply put, is the bottom line of the summary budget hasn't changed. However, due to an error on my part in the early calculation of allocation of salary and wages, particularly on the overtime piece of it, my statistical analysis included the corollary of last year's astronomical overtime due to snow. And because of that mistake, that number trickled down through the entire public works budget, particularly the expenses. Artificially increased overtime, salary and wages, and therefore decreased
Reduced
the
general
expenses.
expenses, yeah.
So with Amy's review, she caught that. We went back, we revised the numbers, we made a much cleaner statistical analysis, not counting a severe winter, and adjusted the numbers accordingly.
So bottom line doesn't change. it's
Bottom
just-
line hasn't changed. None of the solid waste budgets changed, with the exception of solid waste general, which includes a little bit of overtime there. But all of the collection and disposal and the recycling and the landfill closures, none of those changed at all. So, the result was a grave, not a catastrophic, but an error, and the very first calculation that I had made rippled all the way through. So I apologize for that, but the bottom line is still the same, as much as it was 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So even though the bottom line hasn't changed, and that's really all we voted, I guess we still need to revote this?
Yeah, I guess the only question, yeah.
Open for questions, sure.
Yeah, it's, maybe it's more devil's advocate than anything else, but we had an original budget that had higher salaries, and not so much the non-contingent budget, but the contingent budget. You would think that you would have built in the general expenses that you needed in that thing, so that theoretically, if salaries come down, why would we be adding that stuff?
The error was more glaring in the non-contingent budget than it was in the contingent. The contingent budget, there were some adjustments that I made that had to make that made more sense, but it was nowhere near as dramatic as the first.
So there wasn't, well, yeah, percentage-wise, I imagine it wouldn't have been. Dollar-wise, it would have been the same. You're taking X number of dollars out of overtime and moving it into general expenses.
That's correct, but it did not increase the contingent budget.
The bottom line didn't increase, yeah.
It did not.
Yeah, I guess, but just playing devil's advocate, I'm just saying that,
Theoretically,
Yeah.
it could have.
yeah, or reduced it, I guess, even, because presumably you would have, on your contingent budget, provided everything that you thought you needed in the general expense lines anyways.
The validity of the calculation that I use on the non-contingent is very critical to try to balance it. But on the contingent one, what I did is looked at what I thought to be reasonable movement of overtime and salary and wages, and then looked at those efforts and items that we would actually carry out on the expenses. So there really was no real proportionate relation there. So the fact that we're still looking to carry out those types of efforts didn't change much.
Okay.
The only thing that has happened from the last time I was here 2 weeks, and Tom's aware of it, so I don't mind, if you want me to mention, I can.
Yeah.
We've moved forward with, looking at the stormwater cost issue with that unfunded federal mandate. Milton was a participant, still is a participant in a consortium, community initiative challenge grant, which put ourselves out as one of the two communities out of the 9, we were one of the 2, who offered themselves as a pilot program to look at the affordability of these new changes and what types of things would you do if you were to consider creating a stormwater utility. We've moved forward on that. I know the hopes is to have some debate in the next couple of weeks to maybe consider putting a stormwater utility question before town meeting, and we're working with our partners, with the Metropolitan Regional Planning Commission, as well as NEPRA and our own staff. We've met twice now since our last meeting, and we're trying to move that along, so if the question does move forward to town meeting, we have answers for town meeting.
Right. And they should be at our December 15th
We are
meeting
aiming
with
for
a
that, that's
presentation for the board. And, I mean, the only other thing I would add to that is, the reason we're looking at, well, other than fairness, because it allows us to take that unfunded mandate of storm and water and, of stormwater management and share it with the people that are creating the stormwater, which includes the not-for-profits, which includes DCR, and state properties.
Well, currently,
Much
they're
the
not
same
part-
way we build water.
Currently, they're not part of the
Currently,
tax
they're
levy,
not-
but they're
they're not
certainly
paying
part
that.
of the
So there's a
contribution
better
to runoff.
fairness. It's not falling just on the real estate tax payers in the town. Secondly, that on the non-contingent budget, which if we wind up having to go with that, would be probably some draconian cuts and layoffs, especially in the schools, because that's where most of those would come if you had to, that it gives you a significant amount of money to add back to lessen the impact of having a non-contingent, the override doesn't pass. If the override passes, I would suspect that the contingent budget that we go in would be reduced by the amount that we're taking out of the operating budget and moving to a stormwater, so that the bottom line impact would be zero. Actually, a relief for the taxpayers, because
Is the nonprofits.
nonprofits would pick up
Yeah.
some of it. But otherwise, it's some zero.
If people are coming in on the 15th, do you think you'll have the level of detail where you'll be able to show impact on the average homeowner?
Yeah, I've already seen some of it.
Right
I mean, it needs to be tweaked a little bit, but the meeting that Joe and myself had with MAPC, they had already done it out with Milton statistics already in it.
Okay, that'd be helpful to see.
3 or 4 or 5 different scenarios for doing that. There was some tweaking because, they had things like.
The way they were looking at the not-for-profits, for one.
Right,
And
and-
we asked them to include municipal parking lots and municipal buildings,
Right.
just as
And
many.
I think they only had like 8 commercial properties or 4 commercial properties, but they had like 40 industrial properties. I'm saying, where are the industrial properties?
Yeah,
in
they
Milton?
pull those right off the assessor use codes, so it's just
Yeah.
a matter of verifying those.
Right, what they are. But they are very close to having, a lot of different scenarios and with specific Milton statistics
That's
in
good,
it.
that'd be helpful to see.
Yeah, had we not been the recipient of that grant, we would be, we'd be like the other, there are only 7 communities in Massachusetts who have done what we're talking about. There are about another 50 right now on the cusp, and we're one of those 50, but we're way ahead of the curve on being ready to have these discussions.
When you say 7 that have, do you mean have started this process of?
7
or
have
the
already adopted a
utilities?
utility, created that, and
Utilities.
established fees.
Any that are comparable to our size or our?
Newton, Chicopee,
Those are not really our size, but yeah.
they're bigger, but Chicopee's probably.
Northampton, Reading, maybe Reading's the closest.
Right, yeah,
in
it's
size.
probably
Probably
similar,
closest
yeah.
in size, yeah.
It's
And
scary
they-
that we can do this off the top of our head. I mean, there's only 7 in the state.
Yeah.
Now, you look across the entire country, though, the more modern states that have developed, Florida, California, and the southern states, they've been doing this for years by
Yeah.
necessity because of their strict water supply issues that they deal with. But, to the more conservative New England regions like we are in, we're kind of set in our ways, and we're behind the 8 ball. But Milton, in this instance, is way ahead of the curve on it, so we're well poised.
That's good.
That's great.
Okay. So we do have a motion in front of us.
I'll make a motion to approve and forward to the warrant committee the revised FY 2017 budget for the Department of Public Works in the amount of $4,334,340 for a contingent budget and $4,573,032 for a non-contingent budget.
And I'll second the motion.
Motion made second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and now, Joe, your quarterly report.
I forwarded this around in written form at the last meeting, so I don't need to, I won't go through this verbatim.
No,
I'll just try to give
that's
a
fine.
quick snapshot of this. We already spoke about snow fighting in the last meeting anyway, so I'm not going to even recap on that one, though we are going to talk about the policy after this. Basically, throughout the summer, we've been working on 3 major water projects. It's a $5.4 million bond issue, $6.5 million worth of construction work. I'm happy to report that everything has gone extremely well. As of last Friday, when I wrote this, we were targeting December 4th being the touchdown day for the first tank being on its foundation. We did in fact achieve that last Friday. That's going great. That's ahead of schedule, that's under budget. the water main project, which everybody wrestled with, mostly the commuters and the residents who live anywhere near Canton Avenue. That was completed Thanksgiving week, and they had been doing cleanup a week after that, but that project ostensibly is complete. We're in hiatus now till springtime when we come in and rebuild the roadways, which will be another set of disruptions unto itself, but at that point, we new water main, new utilities, and a nice surface.
So you've done one, there were 2 Chickatawba tanks, is that true? or-
2 Chickatawas was replaced with
With
one.
one, okay.
That project now, the tank is on, the foundation. Reality is now, with cold weather, what we have is end of December, early January cure date for the sealants that we use, but we're doing all the site work. The electrical work started yesterday. Site work's been ongoing, and we finished underground piping today. And then the solar panels, these are just a run-out controls, this isn't an array. They get put in at the end of the project. But that project will be ready to be up and running mid-January.
Okay, no deer hunter shot it.
No, we worked really carefully. No, it's silly. I was very concerned about that. We worked real carefully with DCR and the state police early on in the whole idea of them opening the hunt. And they actually worked a safety corridor around us, and it was excluded from the area. So we were everybody was safe. And the last one was the PRV project. So all 3 projects are pretty much quiet right now. The goal will be to get onto Big Blue. My report here says sometime in early April, mid-spring, and the reality is our contractor wants to go up there in February without missing a beat. He's willing to take on the winter conditions, keeping the site clear for his own access, just to keep busy. And if that's the case, we're going to be probably a good 2 or 3 months ahead of schedule. The reality is the deadline on all of these is December of 2016 to wean Canton off of us off of them. And I'll be happy to report, without question, we'll be able to do that come July 1.
Good.
Full 6 months ahead of schedule.
Great. You also mentioned that the ski area and hooking them up with water.
Yep, the DCR awarded that contract. Their contractor is working out on Route 138, which I guess is Washington Street and their
Yep.
stretch there.
Yep.
And they're installing that new pipe connecting over to what will be the feed to our tank.
So they're going directly into the tank.
They're going to be going, not to the tank, they're coming across the museum, Trailside Museum, and connecting in the feed pipe at the bottom, connecting in from
Gotcha.
there, and then coming across their parking lot to feed a new pump house. That's already under construction. Their hope was to make snow with that facility this particular season, realistically. Not my project, I really shouldn't criticize it, but it doesn't look like it this season, but definitely will be ready for them next season.
So they'll probably still be on Canton water for this season.
That's, if it gets cold enough to make snow, yeah.
It will eventually.
Well, eventually. So that's it. On sewer, we continue with our II program. We have, we did our reconnaissance of our pipe system. We did all of our repairs this year. We did like 20,000 linear feet of rehab. That's 3.8 miles, and we did about another 20,000 feet of evaluation. We evaluate 1 year, and then we do the rehab, the sequential year after that. What we also added this year, if you remember, we did smoke testing in one of the more vulnerable areas. It more as a pilot to see what kind of results we would get and what sort of issues we would be dealing with residents. That project happened this past fall, early mid-fall. It's been completed with their compiling the results at this point. Not a lot of heartache. We did find some things, nothing super duper, but some things that can be remediated and therefore taken out of the flows, therefore reduce some rates for us using the MWRA assessments. We continue to plod along with identifying our customers who haven't been getting sewer bills, and the height of that has gone by. At this point, we're picking away at it. We did have a personnel issue with a long-term absence in the department where we kind of had to shuffle some people around and take the emphasis off of being able to do that aggressively throughout the summer. But nonetheless, we still found, we did a comprehensive evaluation of all of our municipal facilities, clean up our own houses, as well as going, looking at the private properties. And we found, some issues with our own things, school department and other municipal facilities. They've all been rectified. They've been put back on the sewer rolls and put back on the water rolls. There are still some, some metering issues that we have to work out, but those were good things that we found, and we've addressed pretty, actually, about 8 or 9, just last April and May, that we identified those.
Good.
So that's, the last thing we're looking at is we have 2 pump stations that have old and deteriorated force mains. That's the pipe discharging from the pump station. That's the opposite of what we're typically concerned with. We're typically concerned with water getting into the system. These are old deteriorated force mains that when they break, they're pumping sewage into the soil.
That sounds nasty.
Well, it's even nasty when you have to go in and fix them, because it's not like you're dealing with clean water. It's a tough thing. One's on Randolph Avenue from the lower Randolph pump station coming up towards our yard. Goes back to Gravity at Reed Street. The other one is down on Granite Avenue. They're both old, deteriorated, and need to be replaced. So we've got our consultant, looking at that, putting design documents together this winter. We'll go to bid this coming spring for a project this summer for those 2.
Highways?
On the roadway front, we, like every other community in Massachusetts, we got our share of the winter recovery assistance money. Milton's share was $93,368. That was a use it or lose it proposition. All work had to be done and money's reimbursed by June 30th. We did that. We met that. What we did this paving season is Highland Street, Robbins Street, Big Blue Drive, Milton Street, which is Milton Street West, not to besmirch the folks over Milton Street on the Quincy line. 2 different Milton Streets in the same city, same town. And we also did the top, put the top layer on Spafford, which had been binded last year. So we completed all those this paving season. We opened up bids this past spring for the Big Blue Park, the Blue Hill Parkway, Elliott Street, Blue Hill Avenue interchange down by Mattapan Square. That was with a $2.55 million grant through the state that Senator Joyce worked to get under Milton's control. So even though they're DCR in state roadways, it's a Milton project. The money's coming back through us. The issue is we always knew the project was far more valuable than that. And in fact, we opened bids in the spring, and we were about almost $2 million short of what we needed to carry out that project. We thought it was dead in the water, and went back to DCR. And DCR, they knew that the number was a little low to begin with. They gave us some encouraging word this past summer that they felt as though they could come up with some additional funding, and we thought also that bidding, to reject all bids and rebid it in the fall, we'd get a better climate for a lot of reasons. The economy was improving, fuel costs are coming down. There were things that we thought would give us some savings. We opened the bids, we saved $250,000. Not
So a
chump change.
little bit of savings, yeah.
We're still $1.5 million short.
But this is, this is 100% state.
None of our
There's
money.
Not a dollar of our money.
We're going to oversee it, we're going to administer it with our own forces, much as we did with Canton Avenue at Unquity, when they did that signal over, and much as we did at Blue Hill Parkway and Brook Road about 6, 7 years ago. Senator Joyce has been real good about trying to maintain local control for these bigger projects, make it happen, and then make sure we can maintain control over it, which has been great. We were set to meet with DCR commissioners and leadership folks to talk about that additional funding. Literally, the day before we were making that phone call, the commissioner resigned. So we're in the midst of, working with the new interim commissioner and trying to put that meeting together. But we're confident. The money, we know, we're still confident the money's there. The folks that we know on the engineering end of it, who have their knowledge of the money, know it's there. It's just a matter of getting that to happen. We think that a project could actually begin this spring and next summer. But it'd be a full 2-year project. It's a big project. Safe Routes to School, that project's moving along well. That's a $1 million federal highway grant. That project's slated. It's all fully approved. We did the right-of-way acquisition, if you remember, at town meeting. That acquisition is complete at this point. That project is going to go out to bid in the wintertime. They want it to be a spring project, but it's in a school neighborhood by definition. And it may behoove everybody to rethink a mid-school year start and maybe just wait until school gets out of session at the end of June and just finish it over the summer.
But as part of that project, Joe, that's when Brook Road is going to be paved between Kerrigan's Corner and Glover, right?
And a little beyond Glover, and Canton Avenue will be paved from from Vos's all the way up to School Street.
because that part of Brook Road is in tough shape, so.
Yeah.
We're talking summer?
As is that, that's right, this summer.
Okay. For some reason, I thought it was going to be this past fall, and I thought it got pushed off to the spring, but a little ways away.
It's, our involvement was the conducting of the hearings and the acquisition of the right-of-way. It's still a state, it's a
Yeah.
federal highway funded job, and it's a state project. So we don't have much control over when they actually
Yeah, I
carry it
know.
out. Though if they say we want to break ground in April, and we've got the congestion that we do on that, I think we want to have some input to the state and say, you might want to rethink this. Why don't you stop when school gets out and just take the June, July, and August and get it done while school's out of session?
So that's what they're thinking.
That will be our recommendation. We've already, made that voice.
So
voice
that
our concern.
scenario is only if they come back to you and say that.
Oh, no, we've already offered that up front.
Okay.
We've already offered, they haven't said no, but they also haven't even bid it yet. So they don't even know who the contractor is yet.
Okay. Well, we're talking about roads. Well, David, you had a question
Yeah, no,
about if we
I
know what
had
the...
some inquiries about the next projects, I know Chapter 90 money obviously dictates all of that, but, with mainly most of Canton Avenue and other streets around town, maybe we could just enlighten some of the viewers on some of the next...
Have we decided what our next round of Chapter
next
90?
round, yeah.
It's premature to give you specific streets, but I can tell you generally what the process is. Every single roadway segment, which means block to block along even long roads, every single segment of roadway is evaluated on what's called, and given a pavement condition index. It's an analysis, it's an analytical. You drive by with infrared sensors and you can determine all those things. And what it does is it gives a pavement condition index for each segment of roadway, and then you look at the overall length. And that gives you basically a roadway capital plan. It tells you what your needs are, and Tom, as chairman of the capital committee, knows that we use this tool pretty carefully. It also points out, the funding gap that we have. It's about $1.2 million a year that we're short as compared to what we ought to be spending just to maintain and not lose further ground. So we've been funding typically roadway work almost completely, I say typically, and with emphasis, only through Chapter 90, but over the past couple of years,
You got some capital?
we've gotten some capital money through
Right.
the capital committee in recognition of this gap.
Yeah,
In
far short of the 1.2
Still
or
far
3.
short, but better than nothing. But we've also gotten, in 1 year, was $1 million infusion just for Central Avenue, which took a really bad roadway, took it off the chart, and did fund it almost at the full level. So that was a very good year. So that being said, we know what roadways, surfaces in the worst shape, and the things that they need. We temper that against all of our capital plans. What's our water system look like? We have a master plan for the water. What's our water system, a sewer system look like? We have that master plan and that II stuff that we do. And we work with the gas company, because the last thing any of us want to do is put a new roadway surface down and have the infrastructure underneath fall apart. So we try to blend all those together and work those and coordinate those projects. So you will typically see the roads that we're rebuilding are the roads that we just put the water mains in last year, and the gas company came in and put the gas mains in. So that's how it is we look at that. So that being said, is next year's roadway program will almost completely look like Forest Street, Hillside, and Canton Avenue, from Blue Hill Parkway all the way out to the ski area. And that'll be using some of the water money from our capital in our Chapter 90 allocation. That's going to fund that program.
Yeah, I think that's, what you've said is educational for people out there who are listening. I think, that kind of answers a lot of the questions that they may have, but I think it makes a lot of sense.
So, great example, and I dare say, School Street between Canton Avenue and Central is probably the worst street, given the volume of traffic that it sees. There may be streets worse that don't see the traffic. It sees a lot of cut-through traffic. However, the water main and the swim mains are deplorable under there. So you're going to likely see two water projects, one focusing in East Milton and one focusing on School Street, next summer, as we work through the winter and put these projects. I think you're going to be seeing those types of things, which would mean those roads would then get rebuilt the following year.
Great.
As long as we're on that too, we talked about a month or so back, there's some additional Chapter 90 that really has a cutesy name to it.
Smart streets?
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Smart cities, not smart streets, city streets?
Do you remember what it,
We,
Safe streets.
We seem like we might qualify for it, but,
we're already doing the things, we're already doing all of the things that you need to qualify.
Yep.
And John Thompson's already taken one seminar, which is a
it looks like it
prerequisite.
needs a Board of Selectmen vote or adoption of it.
So John's going to another Bay State Road sponsored seminar to tell us exactly how to put this together. We're already doing the thing, so there's not a lot of money coming back to Milton even when we are qualified, but let's take credit for what we're already doing. So as we rebuild every single street, we always look at the handicapped access, we look at cycling routes, we always try to accommodate those features within our designs.
But we're doing it out of Chapter 90 money, it doesn't include the bonus money that you'd get out of that program.
There's not a whole heck of a lot of bonus money,
But
right?
it might be something.
That's right, there's something, and we are real close to qualifying. Like I said, when John takes that seminar that he goes to, I think that's the last prerequisite when he's going to be able to bring something into you.
Okay, good, good. Any other questions? Stormwater, we kind of talked about already.
Yeah, actually, we have talked about that. There's not much there. You know, we clean catch basins, we sweep our streets, we try to use minimal sand and higher concentrations of salt. So all those things that are good. We talked about the fact that we were part of a pilot study to look at financing. That's moving well along. We just got word, day before yesterday, that we got a $19,000 share grant from Coastal Zone Management from FEMA for the smelt fisheries. And it sounds silly, but the Unkwitty Brook tributary, which starts at the police station, meanders down through Milton Academy, the cemetery, and makes its way down to Gulliver's Creek, down by Squantum Street, is a cold water fishery, and the smelts are, a dronomous migratory fish. Use those lower waters, and we got a grant to study it. And the reality is it's not a bad thing to have. So, yeah, that just literally unveiled yesterday. There'll be a more formal notice being made probably when I come back next week. The Coastal Zone Management wants us to increase the scope, but don't want to give us additional funds to do that. So we have a bit of a discussion with them to see how we can pull that off. And that was also another partnership with NEPRA. A DPW yard study, which was, you've already heard that summary before, but that was a major effort we undertook over the past year. We brought that to completion back in the spring. Made a presentation at town meeting in the fall. The committee made a presentation to the Board of Selectmen. We've asked that, that we move forward with the next step. We have to ask. But we also understand the financial limitations. That next step is to really do, the site assessment, take the conceptual designs through design development and get them to the point you can get refined estimates to know what our overall facility does look like. So I know that the committee submitted a letter, not so much a request to the selectmen, it's really selectmen's
Yes.
project.
Yes.
Asking to move that forward. So
Yeah, we did discuss it at our last meeting, and the kind of feeling is it's we don't feel it's ready for prime time yet, and that I think we're still,
I thought you were reaching out to Stan Janiga about it.
yeah, I have not had a chance yet, but
Because one of the questions was, could we do it in pieces?
pieces, yes.
Yeah.
And other than that, but the problem, the biggest problem I see with it is without a project, all it is a study that you wouldn't be able to wrap in, and the bonding life is going to be significantly reduced.
Yeah, put that in perspective, Tom, and you're right. I mean, without being vague, it's $675,000 investment, which is more than a study. It really takes it, as any sort of construction project would, it takes it through design development, it takes it through architecturals.
Right.
It takes it to just that step before plans and specifications, before bidding.
Right.
But at that point, you've committed substantial money. I mean, you've committed to moving it to the next step.
Right, but we
which
have
is-
no approved project.
Which is a $20 million plus project.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the issue.
Yeah.
But, the committee worked hard, they
They did.
put out a
they
good
did.
product, and.
I will reach out to Stan, and,
And speaking of the funding of the final, the $20 million, or whatever it is project, that's just a guesstimate.
yeah.
What's the status on the legislation?
I was going to ask Anne Marie to
No,
call this,
they-
yeah, because we haven't heard anything, but, and we haven't
Maybe
heard
it's
any.
worth seeing how that's going to fare before we decide on putting an article forward. I mean, I guess that's a conversation for another day, because that's
Right,
really not on,
right. But there's still a lot of
but
balls
there's
up in the
still
air,
some-
yeah.
Yeah.
And that is going to be my shortest quarterly report ever, unless you've got questions.
Nope.
I don't have any more, and then the next thing on the agenda was the snow and ice, right?
Yes.
And-
So it's showing up a second
Oh, wait,
reading.
before we do that,
Okay.
no, we did make the budget, right? We approved the budget.
We did.
Okay, so yeah, the snow and ice then.
So it's showing up on the agenda as second reading. We made the presentation as a group, the meeting before last. Everybody, you've all gotten a hard copy of that. There were some things in there that, we had discussed in detail. There were some questions that were still being raised in there. Hope you had a chance to read it. I've changed nothing other than take some of the editorial comments out that were questions for you folks, taking them out, taking the draft off, and at a request through the press, they've asked that the town release it, and I was directed to do so, so I've done that. But at this point, if there aren't questions, or if there are questions, we should continue to talk about it. If there aren't questions, I suspect we ought to consider putting a policy in place formally, and probably takes a vote of the board to do so.
Yeah, I don't have any particular,
No, I don't either. I mean, I think it's been a lot of good work put through by, a lot of qualified people.
yeah, all appeared to make sense the first time. Obviously, there's certain things that the editorial comments, things that we can't do yet. We don't have bylaws for them or anything, but,
Sure, but it's a policy.
Right.
And if that's a goal within any policy, that's something you folks may decide to move forward on, as the pace makes sense. But in the meantime, it's in there as a need, and I think it's appropriate.
right.
Joe, could you just, I'm trying to find it, just talk a little bit more again about the call center and how that's going to work? I think that's a key component of it, since we had, one of the big problems last year was people calling and not being able to get a response quickly. So I know we talked about trying to make sure that we had
It falls under-
almost like a little command center set up, whether it's at the police station or at the DPW. I guess the DPW office probably makes the most sense.
Right.
But we
Pull
also talked about
administrative people
using.
into man phone lines.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I think we talked about using the command center at the police station for that.
Well,
But I
how-
don't know that that's in here.
It is, but not in that sort of specificity. That really falls into probably several different modes, and it's addressed in several different areas of this policy. First, on staffing requirements. I think we have to all recognize that every emergency has various levels of extreme. Last winter being the worst in a long time, and in every snowstorm being an emergency of some sort. So, you need to have a general policy that makes sense, which is how this was written, to address all of those things, but be able to recognize within your incident command system of when you ratchet up to those next levels. So typically, you would start with a call center simply being at the DPW office. And, but if town hall is closed, one of the things I'm saying early on is your staffing requirements, all hands on deck. That, all folks of the Public Works Department, regardless of what union they're in, ought to be considered, essential emergency personnel, and therefore, don't get the day off, and, or need to talk about how they get paid while they come in, and their colleagues at town hall do have the day off. That sort of stuff has to be worked out through the union. But nonetheless, the need is real, so having the folks aboard is something that, we're gonna move towards happening.
Yep.
As that moves up further, it could involve having to mobilize other untapped assets within the same unions. That would include the park department, the cemetery department, and the consolidated facilities department. Consolidated facilities, for the most part, already are on the job.
But those would be manpower more for manning equipment.
But also, their administrative staff could also help assist with the phones
Gotcha.
as well.
I think that would be advantageous, if obviously working with the unions. And also, something that you had mentioned last time is that ensuring, and that we have really laid out a communication process for residents.
That's just where I was going to go,
Yeah,
David,
okay.
exactly. Exactly that, is that, recognize the flow of information in and out should be through a single hub that's reliable and accurate, not relying on social media, not relying on the gossip chain, that everything needs to flow through that one hub where it is received, processed, logged, disseminated, prioritized, addressed, and back out.
Yep.
And that relying on, I'm going to say it, the social media as a way of thinking, well, why isn't the department doing anything about it? I put this on Facebook, 4 hours ago. We're not reading Facebook in the snowstorms.
Right.
In fact, I'm not even reading the ones that they're putting out there because I've been denied membership to their blog. So if you think you're making a report through social media, you're not. Make it through these two means.
Right. On the other hand, social media can be useful in terms of us
General.
putting stuff out to our social media for people to see.
Well, I did say at the last meeting that townofmilton.org and the Milton DPW Facebook page, those are reliable. Those are going to
Police
have,
Facebook and
those are going to
the
have,
town's
and the police
Facebook.
Facebook, those are going to have accurate information.
Police also has Twitter, that they can get information out
Social
of.
media overseen by the municipal side, so that's...
Right, with controlled information coming out of it. So, to David, to your point exactly, there's really two means to do that, to make a report. And means number one is if you have the ability to do it electronically, email is the most reliable. I fully recognize not everybody has email, but Storm Events, one word, Storm Events at townofmilton.org. You make your report, that immediately ends up in our call system. That's a computerized tracking system. It gets out to the supervisor, and that supervisor prioritizes it. And more importantly, when it comes in via email, your fingerprint is on that. So as it moves through the process and as it gets addressed, you're going to get an answer back via email. So it's automated. Use that when you can. Most people have that ability, some don't. And those who don't, we're still going to have the phone system. And that number is always going to be 617-898-4900. You can listen to the greeting, but the second choice is going to be for any storm-related emergency report, press 2. As soon as you dial the number and the voice starts, press 2, it's going to go to the storm line. You're going to leave a voicemail. The takeaway on this has to be that you need to be confident that every single voicemail is listened to and every single email is seen, and they both end up in the same call system and prioritizing. The reason why I say that is what we saw last year was, and I'm not trying to use hyperbole, it's sad. We saw people calling 15, 16, 17 times, and all they were doing
Just clocking the
was
lines.
tying up our phone assets so the other people making a report for the first time couldn't get through.
Right.
We're also still working with our IT department and our telephone consultant. There are limitations in the system, phone system that we know of that won't change the number. That will only improve about how deep we can go with our phone coverage. Right now, it's limited to 3.
Yeah, we use VoIP, voice over internet, and rather than actual telephone lines, you have call paths. They're just places out in the internet, and you're assigned so many call paths. I know we use it, in our business, we have, I think, 4 call, we're not a big business, 4 call paths, which are kind of the equivalent of lines, but then we have 2 that we pay for all the time. Then we have 2 other call paths that are just kind of overflow call paths that we only pay for if the demand pushes calls over to those paths, so they all come in. I don't know if ours works the same way.
We have limitations with regards to the number of calls, without getting too technical, bogging people down, listen to it at home. The limitations are sort of arcane, that if I've got 3 people on the desk answering the phone, and this number, press 2, it goes to the 3 lines. If those people are talking to folks, busy signal. It doesn't go anywhere. If we have got a bunch of voicemail messages, and we have a limit of 30 voicemail messages on our system, if each voicemail is 1 minute, every citizen calling is taking a minute, even if they're taking 30 seconds, that's 15 minutes of somebody, a human being, listening to the voicemail.
Okay.
While that person's listening to voicemail, they've tied up 2 lines, the phone that they were on and the voicemail.
It is
And that's the
possible now,
limitation. So what
it is
we have-
possible now with these systems to get the voicemail to email, visual voicemail, visual or a WAV file. And my
Yeah.
cheap phone system does it, my cheap VoIP, and, it didn't spend $600,000 for it.
But our system, you still have to listen to it on your computer, and you still have to delete it on the phone. You can delete it from your computer.
Right, we
But you
still
have
have
to
to-
physically delete it from the phone as well.
Yeah.
We have IT, I consider this to be a pretty severe hindrance.
Yeah.
In regard, if I get 10 people to cover the phones, if this limitation exists, those 10 people aren't doing me any good. So we have IT, on top of this, trying to resolve this
Yeah.
with our consultant. It would seem, given the sophistication of the systems, that there's got to be something that can be done, seems to be.
You would think so.
So we're working
Yeah.
on that. Regardless of all of that, folks just dial 898-4900, press 2, and have to rely that that IT has worked out, and we've worked out a way to get that answered. That one number will never change, that one email will never change.
Right.
So I don't think we are really ready to vote this tonight, because on the second to last page, we've got some proposed bylaw changes that either we should take out of the policy.
Right, that's what I was
or-
mentioning before, there's just certain
Yeah.
things we can't do yet.
So could we put this on for the 15th for a vote that night? In the meantime, we could probably just send comments to Joe. I had a couple of minor wording changes, but nothing significant, but I do think we should take these proposed bylaw changes out so that it's clear that that's not the current policy, but we can think about if we want to do anything in terms of a warrant article. In order to change the bylaw, we have to go to town meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, though. It probably shouldn't be in the policy itself until we have the ability
Yeah,
to
I think so.
do it.
Needs to be, Katie, I completely agree, but it needs to be stated in the policy some way to discourage the practices of parking on the streets and disposing snow onto the streets.
Yeah, I guess we could
But
do
you have
that.
to
We could
provide-
do that without, yeah.
But
See, on
discourage the
second to
practice.
last page, though, you've got something about no snow deposited in a public way, so I thought that was your bylaw, or that was your policy, and then below it, you're proposing this bylaw. So it's in your policy, but it looks like you're trying to put it
You still reading from the draft, or are you reading the,
right here, so I'm guessing this is part of the policy here, but this is the proposed bylaw.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You can keep this part.
That's exactly what I was just talking about, yes. That hopefully would discourage the practice, at least get it on the books is why we're concerned about it.
Okay.
And I am back at the next meeting anyway, so we can do this as well as the stormwater stuff.
Okay,
Great.
Thank you, Joe.
good. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome, thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, item 14 is a conference with Bill Clark update on the East Milton Deck project. Hi, Bill.
Hello. How are you?
So, we know we had the 25% meeting, what was that?
Back in September.
Wow, time flies when you're having fun.
We did, and since that time, there has been a slight change, which I actually showed you before, which was the flipping of the project so that we have the green space where Adam Street was, and so we're all talking about the same piece. And we have where the green space is now would be the parking lot. It's 37 spaces. We actually get 2,000 square feet more of green space in this
Configuration.
format than we did if we had left it where the green space was.
So what's the total amount of the park now, under this configuration?
You know,
Is it
I
like an
asked that
acre?
question, actually, Laura Griffin asked that question, and it came back from Howard Stein Hudson that it was 39,000 square feet.
Is that including the,
We've actually taken so long tonight that I was doing the math on the whole air rights of this area, and I know that it's not 39,000. But the air rights document that was signed by the Board of Selectmen in 1993 covers from the edge of Boulevard Street to the edge of the slip ramp where the two fences are. So you take those two areas, that entire rectangle there is 1.16 acres.
it's about 43,000
So
square feet or
it's
something?
a tad more, it's about 49. What that actually says, if you take the air rights document, and look at it, it tells you what you can and what you cannot do in that area. Within that area, we have Boulevard Street, we have the slip ramp, and we have Adams Street. What I'm actually looking for from you is permission to go to town council, work with town council on writing letters back to Federal Highway, to Mass Highway, and to our funder to make sure that we're all on the same page, that we're all in support of moving this thing forward in the most expeditious manner. I mean, we've had parking on Adams Street all the way along, so parking within the airspace has already taken place before, so it's nothing new. Creating a different makeup to the area, yeah, that's the new part.
Okay, well, why don't we back up just a little bit so people understand too, kind of, you know, what's happening here in terms of, there are three major issues or potential impediments with respect to this project. That we've had a couple of people with letter writing campaigns that have been raising the issue and slowing the project down. One is the federal 4F issue. The other one is the state Article 97 issue, and the third one is the 1993 air rights agreement with the town of Milton.
Right.
So those are the three. If you want to just kind of explain what those are, Bill, and
The air
how they
rights-
potentially.
Sure, I'm going to start with the last one first. And the air rights was actually signed by the selectmen back in 1993. It describes who has what rights, who's going to do what. Mass Highway would be responsible for the pavement. Anything that was green or sidewalks is the responsibility of the town of Milton. Anything underneath becomes the Mass Highway. It talks about the greenery, it talks about the drainage, it talks about the irrigation, it talks about lighting, and it talks about structures.
In terms of who's responsible for what?
Who's responsible for what? That's what's in the airspace license agreement. Because there was an effort to make the Manning Memorial Park a park, there needs to go back to Article 97, which is the state's protection of parks. In 2012, Senator Joyce wrote legislation that amended the specifics of Manning Park and the deck over East Milton Square. So he wrote legislation that got voted by more than 2/3 of the legislature that changed the makeup of Article 97 as it relates to the deck over the highway. The 4F series is, the 4F protection is federal. It is something that only Federal Highway Administration can make the ruling of what is and what isn't protected by 4F. When we put together the East Milton parking study, we sent a copy of the study to Federal Highway, trying to push them to address the issue of 4F early. They came back and said the only way that was going to happen is with a full-blown application. We have started the full-blown application process. We have gone through, we have a consultant that has done design engineering. That's Howard Stein Hudson. We've had the 25% hearing, which is the first step. Next step would be 75. We are very close to the 75, but we have to get some of these, we have to get the letter writing campaign slowed down because it's actually holding up our federal review.
Okay. And in terms of MassDOT and the people working on the design program, it sounded like at the 25% hearing that they thought that in terms of the 4F that this plan might meet the de minimis
They felt
changes
that Mass Highway feels that it meets the de minimis.
that is allowable under 4F.
Yes. Federal Highway, because of the pushing that they've been receiving, wants to look at it and doesn't really want to go through the 4F process. They don't want to go through the de minimis process. They want to go through a full-blown 4F review.
Okay.
I think when we actually start looking at numbers, looking at size of space, that there is the potential that we could potentially drag this back into the de minimis.
Right, I guess the question then becomes is, you know, how much of it is qualitative as opposed to quantitative in terms of de minimis? You know,
And I
do
think
they
it's
take into
the-
consideration improvements and usability and that
So-
kind of thing, or is it just
So I think
quantitative?
these are questions of federal
The-
law and the Massachusetts
Right, which we need
Constitution.
somebody to help us
And I
answer.
think the best thing to do is exactly what Bill said.
Yes,
Let's
have
get our
Yes.
town council
I
involved.
agree, I agree.
So I'll move that we direct the town planning director to work with town council to draft any letters that are necessary to federal or state agencies and/or elected officials to state the position of the Board of Selectmen with regard to the deck project.
And try and clarify some of these issues for, I guess, all of us. That sounds good. I guess the only other question I had too, because this really is a state project at this point that we don't have much control over.
So I've made a motion.
Yeah, I'm
We have
gonna
a-
I'm sorry,
second
yeah,
that motion
okay.
too.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so that motion been made, seconded. Any further discussion on that motion? And I guess the discussion I would have is not with respect per se to that motion, so we can vote that, but I do have another
Okay.
question. So if you want to vote that, I don't have any.
I have nothing further to add on
Okay.
it.
Okay, so motion been made, seconded, no further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, now my next question is, because this is a state project at this point, that the town really doesn't have a lot of control. We have some input into it, I guess, but, and I'm not even clear as to where our, you know, how we play a role in this compared to the state and who has what responsibilities and who has what.
We'll go back and have another, what we'd be doing is amending the airspace agreement and adding more specifics to it.
But even, I guess that wasn't really my question. I understand that, you know, that this may take, and we need legal counsel to do that, or help us through that, but is that our role at this point, or is it the state's role? Or who, because again, like, it's a MassDOT project right now.
State owns the road. State owns the air rights. What they've done is used federal money to create a town common, which is that's the name within the
Right.
airspace license.
And once it gets created, we'll have to maintain it.
We have to maintain it again.
Yeah,
So it's, again, just, it's amending the existing agreement with more specificity.
okay. Okay, and I guess to that point, it's, since it's their project, some of that responsibility, since that's the project that they're proposing, actually, they designed it, and, you know, I mean, they come back to us with the 25% hearings and everything, but it's still their design, right? I mean, to what degree should they be?
They're working at our request. We're the ones that requested the
Right, it
change
wasn't
in
earmarked
design.
grant, so, yeah, so.
So they need us, we need them. It's a partnership. It'll continue to be a partnership. It'll become a product that they own the land, but they don't have to do the upkeep we do. They don't have to do the maintenance we do.
Right. But they've got to build it, they've got to spend the money.
Yep.
Um,
We're going to use the federal money that's there. That federal money does have a state requirement to it. They know that, they anticipate that.
The state match, yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that will be in the, we move it to the next step, we'll get it to the tip, and then we'll identify, the state will have to identify where the money's coming from within the state.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, let's try and get that sooner rather than later, so we can, you know, try and move this project forward. I think, you know, I think it's got support of the majority of the residents of the town. It's my sense. You know, certainly in terms of the East Milton people, I think it definitely does. I think they want to see it happen. You know, so let's,
I think the new design is actually, it meets all the new standards of transportation projects.
right.
Which
Plus,
is,
it greatly
pedestrian
improves
walkway.
walkability.
And it's, by moving it north from where it is currently. There's less noise. It does make a different sight line. And it actually puts the parking onto Boulevard, so it makes it a little easier that it's not all on Adams. It's not all on Granite Ave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
So it gets helped by a light.
Yeah, no, I do like the design. And I would be curious, too, if you can figure out what the size of the park's going to be at some point in time.
We will have that shortly. I mean, we should have that now, what the square footage is.
Yeah, what it is currently and what it will be.
Right, they're saying 39. I know it's a little bit less than 39, but I know that it's more green than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, any other questions?
I have no questions.
Okay,
Thank you, Bill.
thank you.
thanks, Bill. Okay, item 15 is the approval of the closing date of the February 2016 special town meeting. And
I'll move that we approve January 14th, 2016, at 5:00 PM. Is that wrong?
December?
Your zone was wrong, I changed it today.
Oh, all right, I'm reading off the paper.
Okay, yeah, it's on the.
All right, then we'll revise that. I'll move that we approve December 14th, 2015, at 5:00 PM as the closing date for submission of articles at the February 8th, 2016 special town meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay, town administrator's report.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the only thing I'd like to report is I would like to publicly thank the amateur gardeners for all of the festive decorations that you see around Town Hall, the gazebo, and the fire station. They continue every year to decorate the Town Hall. And
Yeah,
so
that's
festive and
beautiful.
nice, and so I really would like to publicly thank them.
So I guess on Friday evening, we had a Christmas tree lighting out here that unfortunately was the same night as the Fireman's Ball, so it couldn't be in two places at once, but, yeah.
Yes.
But- So the Christmas tree looks beautiful out there.
Yes, as well.
Okay, chair's report. I did go to the Fireman's Ball. It was well-attended and good time. I mean, other than that, we have an all-day hearing tomorrow on the, mediation session on the Randolph Ave 40B project, and see what happens with that. But, we're quite a distance apart between 35 units and 90 units of housing, so don't know how realistic it is to come to any kind of meeting of the minds, but we'll see. Other than that, I don't have anything else to report. Members' reports.
I don't have anything at this time.
Neither do I.
Okay. Citizen speak responses? Nothing? Okay, future agenda items. Again, we want to get those policies, I think, on either a December or an early January.
It would probably have to be early January, Mr. Chairman, because your December 15th agenda is pretty packed. You've got Powers and Sullivan coming in for your audit report. You've got Parker Elmore coming in on Gatsby.
45,
You've
yeah.
got, You've got Joe Lynch coming back in. You have a number of items already on your December 15th agenda, so those would probably have to be on one of your January agendas.
Okay. Any other future agenda items?
Yeah, so I think, I was hoping we were going to do this in December, but the town administrator search process, that's the highest priority, I think, for the board going into the new year.
Yes.
So what I'd like us to get are copies of the 2013, Anne Marie. You know, I know there was a job description because I was on the town government study committee at the time, and that committee wrote one, but I think you had a separate one that the prior board used anyway. So I think we need
Right.
to get copies of those.
We're obviously going to have to revise that job description.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at least, it's somewhat informative. Whatever other, if there's any memos or anything about the process and how the committee was selected, appointed, what the membership was, I think anything that we can get relating to the prior search would be helpful especially for David and I, as the two newer members who were not part of the last town administrator search process. Because we need to have a discussion where we talk about what qualifications are we looking for, what's the process going to be, what kind, how big or
Yep.
what's the size of the committee, who might we be, what might we be looking for in terms of appointing members to the committee? But if the 15th is pretty busy, then maybe that should be on the, if we could get the materials in advance, that gives us enough time to look at them, and we could put it on for the first meeting in January, but I think that's a top priority.
I agree, I
January.
agree, yeah. It is.
That's the only thing I had for future agenda items. I know we still want to get pilot and everything else on, but.
Yeah, and
Yep.
and Anne Marie and I had actually spoken this week about getting together about, working with some of the policies and recommendations given to us already, and then formulating some more information to get together for the new year and take that on.
Okay. So, executive session, I'm going to propose a motion to enter executive session for the purpose of approving executive session meeting minutes, discussing strategy with respect to litigation, believing that having such discussion in an open session would have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the body, and to return to open session for the purpose of adjournment.
Second.
Okay. Motion made and seconded. Ms. Conlon?
Yes.
Mr. Burns?
Yes.
Mr. Hurley, yes.
Hello.